Ladies and gentlemen, farmers and farmettes, ask not for whom the scarecrow reaps, lest your homestead be the site of a harvest most hair-raising. In this corner, a creeping spray of suburban decay, Friday the 13th, the series, and the challenger, dragon ligneous legs cross your lifeline. Are you afraid of the dark? Better to make hay in the light of day on Put Up Your Spooks!
This is We Bleed Orange and Black, the podcast for Halloween and horror lovers. Join us as we interview creators, discuss our favorite horror, share original scary stories.
I'm Ryan Gerasi. I'm repping them 90s.
I'm Jeff C. Carter, and I'm repping the 80s.
This week's theme...
Scarecrows. I've been jonesing for scarecrow horror.
It's an interesting subgenre, except possibly limited, as beat for beat our episodes were nearly identical.
Well, that could just be the problem with cheesy horror.
Perhaps.
But there is a movie coming out soon, an adaptation of a popular book, Clown in a Cornfield.
Oh no. Something with a spooky clown?
The book series is already 3 volumes deep. I've been interviewing people on the podcast lately who have had short stories or longer works tied into cornfields and scarecrow horror, and I just feel like it's in the zeitgeist, and it's always in our hearts.
We're corny that way. My episode of Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of the Silent Servant. Skipping over the Midnight Society, except that Betty Ann, again, the gross-out queen, or so the other Midnight Society says, but really nothing gory or gross in this episode. I mean, come on, guys. If you're going to label someone the gore queen, you got to tell a gory story.
Do you think that Betty Ann's stories don't actually make it onto the show? Are You Afraid of the Dark?
They're just too gory and disgusting. Yeah, maybe that's it. You know, because it's funny that you say that.
Too hot for Nickelodeon?
You've talked about this before a little bit, but they could have very well told dozens and hundreds of other stories that we just never saw. I never really thought about that.
And we know that there's generations of the Midnight Society that go back to when that stone chair was first erected back in the Stone Age.
All right, so there's 2 kids out in the countryside. Jared, who's like this horrific twerp little piece of shit, and he's visiting, I don't know, he's like City Mouse, I guess.
Jared is a City Mouse. He is a baseball kid. He is the epitome of our post-goth conversion that we've seen in so many episodes.
Was he a goth before this, do you think? Did he have another
I don't know if he was.
Maybe this will turn him into a goth, this experience with the Scarecrow.
Interesting. He's going to come all the way back around to goth from being a super hardcore baseball kid.
So he's visiting his cousin, Country Mouse, Anne, at her farm. And they're playing catch. Anne doesn't want to play catch because she's tired and hates baseball. But Jared's like, go long. And they have at least 150 acres of farmland surrounding them. But they're playing catch right beside the farmhouse. And wouldn't you know it, ball goes right through the front door window. So their dad comes out, and he's like quite level-headed about the whole thing. But he's like, well, gonna have to work off that window. And I was like, wait a minute, this guy looks familiar. Is that the cab driver from Phantom Cab? All these years, and I never realized it. And if you go to his IMDb page, his thumbnail is the fucking Phantom Cab.
Yeah, I mean, if you have one thumbnail to choose, that's the one.
Yeah, for sure. So he's like, yeah, you got to do some chores. First of all, you got to deliver some beans. And boy, if you wanted a story about delivering beans, this one delivers. Because we're going to hear about these beans over and over again.
What you're not going to hear is them getting delivered.
Boy, I totally messed up. Open on Crazy George laying face down in some hay.
And probably horse manure.
Yeah, and God knows what else. He is startled by Mr. Earlstead, who's like, you rapscallion, what are you doing in my hay? And Crazy George is like, whoa.
Cano vector solemnos. The words don't work.
And then Mr. Earlstead is like, get on up out of my barn, y'all. And so Crazy George runs away, and then the barn has like a little side closet. The door starts shaking off its hinges, and Mr. Earlstead's like, I'll come deal with you. after I deal with our friend Crazy George. And the presumption is he's going to go kill Crazy George. Cut to 20 years later, horrible twerp City Mouse is playing with his relatively, I don't want to say level-headed again, because I think I already called the dad level-headed. His relatively normie country mouse cousin playing baseball. They break the window. Fast forward. Blah, 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 blah. So they're delivering beans. They hop on their bikes. They pass by Mr. Earlstead's farm. Now it's 20 years later. It's abandoned. They're like, whoa, awesome, horrible, dilapidated, rundown barn. Let's go check it out. So they go in there. Jared is like, we can use all these boards for my dugout, which is silly because he doesn't even have a baseball diamond.
He doesn't have a baseball diamond. Also, he's just there for the summer, and he needs to build a dugout to play catch.
And all of his baseball stuff got confiscated when he broke the window. So, like, this kid, So instead of, like, picking up any of the millions of boards that are lying around, they decide to pry a board off the closet door that we saw in the prologue. And out falls a creepy burlap scarecrow. And they're like, wah! One of the chores that they were tasked with was building a fence around the garden so that the deer can't get to it. And Jared is like, whoa, this scarecrow will scare the deer away. And is like, scarecrows scare crows, not deers. But they start to pick it up anyway, and they find this little bone thing that Crazy George was clutching in the beginning with these dragons sculpted onto it. And then they gather up the scarecrow and the dragon bone, head on back to the farm where they set up the scarecrow. Anne's brother Mark, who is also a baseball kid, but like softball kid, like he has a match that Jared really wants to go to, but he's grounded. So they set up the thing, and then Mark, the big brother, is like, whatever, dudes, you still have to build this fence. By the way, how goes the bean delivery? And they're like, oops, we totally got sidetracked by breaking and entering. So he's like, get on your bikes. It's almost nightfall. Go deliver those beans. So they're driving. I should mention that they saw also the tombstone of Mr. Earlstead the first time they barnstormed. They accidentally left the beans in the barn. So they have to go back to the barn. They pick up the beans, and who should pop out from the shadows but Crazy George, a 20 years older Crazy George who has not been murdered, but who has somehow been made crazy. Like, he's like, whoa, it's got a death curse! And then he's like, Mr. Earlstead made me this way!
I used to see rainbow-colored lights. Now, darkness. Such sweeping blackness.
He's just crazy, and he's like spouting nonsense, and he's chanting magic words, which they say 1 billion times, but I cannot remember. Calivactor Solemnos. And he's like, only the creator, only the true master can separate the dragons. They're just laying it out. Old crazy exposition George. And they're like, okay, whatever, George. And he's like, where's the dragons? Why don't you got the dragons? And they're like, we ain't got no dragons, George. And they run away. Do not deliver the beans. Straight back home. They're like, well, better examine these dragon bones. Bones pop open. They find a scroll inside, laying out, again, everything that needs to be laid out. He whosoever reads this scroll will control the silent servant, Galivactor Solemnos. Only the true master can separate the dragons. I don't know why that part's in there.
It's just boilerplate on the end of everything that the wizard wrote.
So then, like, the dad comes in and he's like, yo, take out the garbage. And by the way, better build that fence. So they're taking out the garbage, and they get totally spooked by the silent servant Scarecrow that appears, like, right behind them.
Teleports.
They're like, why don't you build the stupid fence, you silent servant? And then the next morning, they get up, and everyone's like, whoa, what a fence! How'd you do it? And they're like, I don't know, but it's, like, a perfectly beautiful, brand new fence. They're like, Mark, big brother, the fucking Scarecrow did it. And Mark's like, nah, it's just lying in a heap. It didn't move on its own. It didn't teleport. You kids are crazy. Anne is like, dude, it's crazy. You're crazy. Ain't no scarecrow building no fence. And Mark's like, well, let's test it. Hey, silent servant, I command you, build me a dugout. And they go, I don't know, they're riding their bikes. They're still not delivering beans. And then, I think he did command him to deliver the beans when he commanded him to build the fence. So the beans are delivered. silent servant style.
Thank
And
goodness.
they're like riding their bikes around. They get back, and there's an incredible dugout. And they're like, oh my god, this is incredible. We've got all the power. First you get the Scarecrow, then you get the magic words, then you get the dugouts, then you get the power. And Mark comes in and he's like, you little fucks. How are you going to explain this? They're like, what are you talking about, Mark? And he takes them over to the fence around the garden, which has been totally dismantled. The boards having been used to build a dugout.
This is an extra shame because Jared really wanted that artisanal dugout of reclaimed barnwood for his
That's right.
hipster.
He
farm
should have been more specific. You have to be
dugout.
specific. You have to say, using wood that's not
Reclaimed
being used for
barnwood.
anything else, reclaimed barnwood, build me a dugout. Mark's like, whatever, I can't deal with you. I gotta go to my softball game. It's very important. Here's your baseball gloves. He hands them a big sack. So he goes off to his softball game. Jared reaches into the sack to get his baseball glove, but it's actually just really, presumably very heavy metal tractor parts. And he's like, ugh, Mark stole my glove. And Anne's like, no, he didn't. Jared steps up to camera, finds his mark on the floor, looks right into the lens and says,
I'd like to kill whoever did.
and then they go, oh no, what have you done? They look outside, silent servant teleported away. So they go to the baseball diamond and there's nobody there. And Anne is like, don't worry, I know where Mark is. He likes to get wasted with his friends in the woods after the baseball game. So they drive out into the middle of the woods.
The only thing true to life in this episode.
Most
I knew
deaf.
it was only a matter of time until Jared's monomaniacal obsession with baseball led to someone's death.
Even if there wasn't a magical silent servant, he was gonna kill somebody.
He's literally crazy for baseball.
So they find all the kids, all the softball punks out in the woods, the baseball furies,
Softball.
just drinking beers,
Crushing Canadian beer.
which is no mean feat, let me tell you. He's like, I don't have your gloves. It must be in the tractor still. And they're like, oh God, where's that? So turns out the dad is driving his tractor. He likes to drive. He must have a rider in his contract where he has to drive a vehicle in every episode. His tractor breaks down and he gets out to fix it, and the silent servant is creeping up on him from behind. They're like, we'll never get there in time. So Anne has this revelation they're trying to crush the bone and separate the dragons, but they quite half-heartedly, but that's neither here nor there.
If only they had a group of drunken teenagers with baseball bats. Or softball bats. Maybe that was the problem. They were all like wiffle ball bats.
So Anne is like, I know it. I got the answer. Only the true master can separate the dragons. Jared is like, he's dead and in the ground. A rotting corpse 20 years gone. And she's like, exactly. So they ride back to the fucking barn, Earlstead's homesteads. She smacks the bone on the gravestone, separating the dragons. The Scarecrow, just inches shy of murderizing old Pappy, vanishes and then reappears in a bolt of lightning right in front of the two kids, who are like, ah! And then they're like, I command you, be no more. He falls into a heap of clothes on the ground. The end. Or is it? Just then, Crazy George springs forth from the shadows, mends the broken bone, and has the power. Fade out.
The Scarecrow had twig fingers,
Yeah.
which I thought looked really cool.
It's a cool looking Scarecrow, and a return to cinematographic form with fun angles, good lighting, a lot of daylight, but makes up for it with some good nighttime.
Do you have any unplumbed memories of your summers spent with your grandpa or of your cousin's farm? It seems like these things always swirl to the surface when we cover these plots.
That would relate to scarecrowing, or
Just going to old barns, I guess, as a starter.
there was one time where we were climbing up in the hayloft. In my memory, we climbed up for miles, because like you'd find a little gap in the hay and you'd climb up through it, and then there'd be like another story of hay bales, and you'd find a gap and climb up through that, and it just felt like we were going up and up and up forever, but it couldn't have been more than like, 3 or 4 stacks of hay bales, but it felt like we were climbing into like Narnia or something, you know what I mean? That was cool. I don't know, that's not a very good memory, but it's the cool thing about it is the coloration of time. Like, as a kid, we were climbing into a full-on fantasy world, but looking back on it, it's like we were climbing 3 bales of hay.
Did you ever dive into hay or narrowly avoid a rusty threshing machine or find yourself in a silo full of choking grain?
I mean, my aunts have stories about being chased by rats around the grain silos. My mom has stories about falling through the scuttles into cow manure. I also fell through the scuttle, but I got stuck halfway, so I only got my lower half covered in cow manure.
What's the scuttle?
So the scuttle, it's like, so there are all these stanchions where the cows get their heads put in, and then it closes so that you can hook up the milk machines. So it's like 10 cows in a row, and then behind them on the floor is this little hatch that opens up, so you can scoop all the cow crap into the scuttle, the hole in the floor, and then it just falls 10 feet down onto the ground, and it just piles up, and then they can sell the manure or whatever, or use it for fertilizer. So falling through the scuttle is no fun thing.
That's crazy. I have a vague memory of visiting cousins who had a farm, there being an electric fence, and whether or not we would touch it. I can't remember if we did, which means we must have.
Yeah.
And the voltage was sufficient to purge the memory from my brain. What I remember is that I remember feeding rabbits and horses like carrots, and or maybe they were mules, but in my memory they were horses, and they'd be like, okay, watch your fingers, and I would just shove this carrot forward into the chomping teeth of this horse, and I would get my finger bit, and then I would cry, and then I would never learn my lesson. I would continuously go back and feed carrots to these horses and get my little fingers bitten.
Good death comes to those who wait.
My episode, Season 1, Episode 11 of Friday the 13th, the series, Scarecrow. It's a dark and stormy night, and a farmer in a rough pine board cabin is giving a pep talk to his son, despite their hardscrabble life. He puts the kid to bed and then realizes someone is prowling on the porch. He opens the door and sees a leather-faced scarecrow wielding a giant scythe. Naturally, he laughs it off, until it takes a swing at him. He slams the door, but things get even less funny when the scarecrow teleports inside and scythes his head off.
Impossible scarecrow teleport.
The boy watches as a mysterious stranger in a dark coat steals his father's severed head.
Taken by the headless scarecrow.
In the morning, we see the stranger, a severe-looking woman who raises her arms to salute the sun next to an empty scarecrow post. Our cursed antique hunters, the ravishing redhead Mickey and man of action Ryan, have received an answer to their mailers. Someone has written back and told them to get that blasted scarecrow. Old man Charlie tries to bullshit them about how they used to have a cursed scarecrow, but it burned up. Mickey and Ryan know that cursed objects can't be destroyed, so she excuses herself to the bathroom to snoop around. She finds a rattling door and naturally unlocks it. A disturbed man bursts out and grabs her.
And he says, "It's got a death curse.
It's got a death curse." The homeowner, Charlie, shoves his son back into his room and kicks out Mickey and Ryan, while the old man's wife sadly watches them go. Mickey and Ryan snoop around back across a hill of giant pumpkins and then get yelled at by the neighbor. It's the severe-looking woman, Marge Longacre. She can tell that they're city folk because Mickey is wearing a leather corset. Marge sets them up at her bed and breakfast. It's the only one in town. This is great for the plot because it allows Marge to overhear them chat about how the old lady was about to spill secrets. That night, Charlie's wife, the old lady, sneaks through a thick fog juice-filled cornfield. Marge pins a picture of the old lady to the front of the scarecrow, turning it into a voodoo doll Terminator. The old lady runs across town to find Ryan and Mickey, but she's only going to die tired because she's got a teleporting scarecrow on her heels. And teleport it does, catching her outside the bed and breakfast. Mickey opens the front door and finds the old lady's severed head wobbling on the porch and a freaky Leatherface scarecrow. She screams. Ryan comes a-running. So does Marge, who asks,
"What's all the hullabaloo?"
It was the Scarecrow come to life. That leather mask. And I had a picture of her pinned to its front. It had a huge blade with a handle. Call them a scythe. It must have just cut her head off.
The sheriff shows up and says, "What's all this hullabaloo about a killer scarecrow? Don't go talking shite." Then he comes back the next day and says, "Well, Coroner's report found evidence of death by scarecrow. But Ryan and Mickey are out on the town, bribing locals by overpaying for shitty antiques. They find out that every farm in town has failed except for one. Oh, and 3 people go missing every harvest. But Marge is out there making moves of her own. She approaches Charlie's disturbed son, who's no longer locked in his room, and she sends him after Mickey.
You really like that little redhead, don't you, boy? I can see it, but she's a wild one. Wild little filly. Got a breaker for you can ride her. Break her good.
Their investigation brings them to that first rough pine cabin. Ryan goes inside and finds the boy, who's been hiding out since the night of the murder. Mickey is attacked by a leather-faced scarecrow in a business suit. After a harrowing chase through the blinding rays of the fading sun, blam! The sheriff guns down the scarecrow. They unmask it. It was Charlie's son. Oh, and Ryan found the missing boy. They'll hang on to him for now. They bring the boy back to Marge's bed and breakfast, which, again, is dynamite for the plot.
Where Ryan proceeds to spoon him like a fucking weirdo creep while petting his shoulder ever so gently.
He's a grieving older brother. You wouldn't get it.
That's a 4x3 television framing necessity, unfortunately.
It's like Big Pete putting his hand on
Exactly.
his own shoulder. Marge steals a picture of Mickey from her purse and brings it to the creepy barn of hanging bodies to pin it to the scarecrow. Charlie confronts her with a shotgun and says, "What's all the hullabaloo? First you kill my wife, then my son?" Marge tries to reason with him, then seduce him, which works long enough for her to sink a rusty bailing hook into his spine.
Yep, the fastest way to a man's heart is through his boner.
With a bailing hook. Ryan brings the boy to the creepy barn of hanging bodies for some reason, where they discover Charlie's body hanging among the scarecrows and such. They also find the contract that proves that everyone sold their farm to Marge or something. Meanwhile,
I was so confused. I was so confused by this point.
Meanwhile, Marge locks Mickey in a room with the teleporting scarecrow. Ryan and the boy arrive with the sheriff, but Marge stabs the sheriff in the back with a pair of 14-inch long scissors. Then she jabs them into the boy's neck and threatens to kill him. Normally, Ryan might let this kind of thing slide, but it's been established that he lost his little brother at an early age, so he karate kicks the giant scissors from her hand.
This part was incredible. This whole denouement was incredible, with her being chased around by the scarecrow and blasting through the door, and then him karate kicking the scissors. He goes blah, 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 and then karate kicks the scissors, and it works.
No, it's awesome. It's amazing.
No, you're not going! Sorry!
Marge, not to be outdone, karate kicks him back. Mickey, who has been dodging the teleporting scarecrow for an impressive amount of time, catches a lucky break. When its swinging scythe hits the locked door, she busts through it and escapes. Together, Ryan and Mickey cling to the scarecrow like rabid monkeys, and they manage to tear the picture off its chest. The voodoo Terminator deactivates. It's like they forgot about Marge. She runs at them shrieking with a sacrificial knife.
Psycho style.
In the scrum, she knocks a picture of herself off the wall onto the scarecrow's chest, causing it to reactivate and voodoo terminate her. Problem solved, they ship the boy off to his aunt and take an uncomfortable drive back to Curious Goods with the creepy scarecrow in the back. As they leave town, Mickey asks,
You know, there's one thing still nagging at me.
What's that?
That scarecrow. After it killed all those people, what did it do with the heads?
Taken by the headless.
"Silent servant."
They go to the family with the crazy son, and they're like, "Well, you did buy the scarecrow from our uncle, right?" And I was like, who buys a scarecrow? You just make one out of old hats.
Literally,
And
it's
leaves.
hay, which you have on hand.
It's all over the
and
place.
Old clothes.
Nah, we'd
very
rather buy
weird.
this weird gimp scarecrow.
Maybe the gimp mask was the thing that was cursed, because Marge also has a barn full of hanging scarecrows.
Yeah. Dozens and dozens of scarecrows.
But man, Marge is the real standout villain. That scarecrow can teleport, and it has a scythe and a leather mask for her face, and that's scary. But Marge is karate kicking and stabbing and slashing fools, and she is just like a killing machine.
Yeah, she really is.
At the point where you're stabbing the town sheriff with scissors, it might be time to sell your farm, downsize, and like get your real estate license.
Yeah.
Like, how many people are you going to kill just to raise like soybeans?
So after having watched a couple of these, it strikes me as funny that these two are out there like busting heads and solving crimes because they're not Mulder and Scully. They just happen to have inherited an antique store. As far as I know, they have no combat or fight training.
Did you see Ryan's karate kick?
I saw the karate kick, but I think he got lucky.
No, you're not going! Johnny!
So I think your episode might have a time to kryptonite because they were laying it on thick with the ade, due, double.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the kryptonite is really the tombstone because
The words don't work.
Body count from my episode, 4.
oh my gosh. Well, the sheriff was dead, right?
No, sheriff survived.
Oh, he survived.
But Charlie, his wife, and his son all got killed, and Marge gets it in the end.
And the farmer from the very beginning. So 5.
5. Body count for Are You Afraid of the Dark?
0.
I mean, I guess old age took
Old age took
the old
Mr.
man.
Earlstead off screen.
Okay, body count 1.
Man, I really thought George was gonna get murked at the very beginning. 20 years in the past.
Scare factor for your episode?
I think it's all right. Like when the Scarecrow's doing teleports and appearing and stuff.
It really only threatened the father at the end in one scene.
Yeah.
Which was at most like 2 minutes of screen time. I'm going to say quite low. That Goosebumps episode we watched was a much better use of scarecrows as like a menacing figure.
Were they like,
the window.
was it like Assault on the Farmhouse with like armies of scarecrows? Yeah. I think the scarecrow design in this, like the costume is pretty good and like pretty scary.
I liked the design. It was a very sort of skeletal burlap bag face, but it was mostly in daylight and it was mostly standing around or building fences. It didn't really...
When it was finished, it put itself right back on its post.
Almost not scary at all, except for that 1 2-minute clip. Scare factor for my episode, pretty high. You've got a gimp mask wearing scarecrow swinging a scythe. You've got a crazy lady screaming bloody murder as she kills everyone in sight with baling hooks, scissors, and sacrificial
Gleefully.
knives. Gross factor, my episode had the old lady's severed head rolling around, which was pretty gnarly.
Spatters of bright red blood.
Your episode, as we've discussed, not very gross.
Crazy George could have been a lot sloppier, Could have been foaming at the mouth and stuff. The hell?
I stand corrected. Crazy gross, pretty...
No, he wasn't gross
Crazy
at all. I mean, well, he was a bit gross.
20 years later, he
Yeah.
was like bright green with like rotten teeth. Gross factor for your episode, I say Crazy George is almost up there with the old lady's severed head.
That guy was having so much fun. He was like swinging off ropes and just cackling to the heavens. And
That was amazing. He really was the highlight of the episode. Bring him back.
yeah,
What the factor for your episode?
no, I think it was pretty straightforward.
What the factor for mine? We couldn't quite figure out what Marge's master plan was.
No,
Theme of Scarecrow.
pretty high. My guy was a bit more Scarecrow-y, frankly. Your guy was a bit more Pulp Fiction-y, but both Scarecrows, both very clearly Scarecrows.
But in the barn of hanging bodies, there was like 100 scarecrows.
That's true too. Yeah, just on sheer numbers.
I'm going to call that a tie. Totally 80s for mine. No, I mean, if anything, it was like 1800s. They were really working hard to make it seem like this was some Dust Bowl, hardscrabble farm town. In the beginning with that farmer wearing overalls and he was putting his son to bed and there was like a single bare light bulb hanging from the ceiling and there's like huge gaps in the walls.
He looked like
of
old
their-
man Corcoran with his suspenders and whatnot. I would say that all of Mickey's pants are pretty wonderfully 80s, but other than that, actually they're basically just like the pants of today on a fashionable lady. So
Hella 90s.
the kids were in really baggy t-shirts, but other than that, not really very 90s.
Well, on body count, scare factor, and gross factor, gonna give this one to Friday the 13th, the series, Scarecrow. Every year around Halloween, I put out a playlist with a theme of scary songs. And in 2022, I made a list called Songs to Scare Crows. And it is 13 hand-picked tracks of wonderfully spooky Scarecrow-themed music. I'll put that in the show notes.